Okay, let's talk about our eyes. So what we're gonna do first is get our heat and bond or fusible webbing that we're gonna use. You can choose which ones you use. You can use the heat and bond light, or you can use the heat and bond heavy. The light is used for if you're gonna stitch it on afterwards. The heavy is a lot more glue-like and it says you don't need to sew with it, so you can choose what you want to do. But what we're going to do is here's my piece of felt, and you just stick it right there on the heat and bond and you iron it on there. Then we're going to take our pattern piece. We're going to take our pattern piece and we're going to cut out our eyes. Okay, so I just wanted to show you, I cut out the eyes, here they are, and on the back you can see the fusible interfacing, and I did a little stitch for the eye shine. Look, that's my stitching on the back, so pretty, but nobody's gonna see it, so that's fine. So we're going to, what I did was on the pattern piece, I cut out the eyes that were needed, or the eye placement guide. I cut them out. Then what I like to do is I line up the eye shines to make sure they're not looking wonky, and I put them in there, and then I pin them in place. And what I like to do is then with my pins, I pull them up so that it's not covering the paper on the one side, and then it's super easy just to slide the pattern piece off. See how that works? And then what I like to do, you have a few options, but what I like to do is I just get my needle and thread and I just do a little bit of a whip stitch around the eyes to hold them on. The other options you have is you can do another zigzag stitch, a tight zigzag stitch around the eyes. If you're doing that, be careful of your eye shine, that you don't stitch over top of your eye shine, or you can just do a straight stitch around the eye. So those are all your options. Plus, once again, if you use like the heat and bond heavy, then the directions on it say that you don't have to sew it, so you can always use that as an option as well. So what I'm going to do is iron these on and use my interfacing to hold them into place so I don't have to have pins, and then I will take the pins out and I'm going to stitch them on. Okay, so I think we're ready to start sewing. We have our face, and I have stitched on the eyes. Here's my stitching. So we're ready to actually start sewing on the sewing machine. So the first thing that we want to do is we're gonna close this dart right here, and we're gonna close this seam right here. So we fold it in half, line up your seams, and we're just gonna go from here down to where we marked, and I actually forgot that dot, but there should be a dot there that we will go to. So go to the dot, and then when you get done with that, we will sew from one end of the fabric to the other right here. So let's do that. Okay, so here's our stitched seam. We started right here, and we went down along and went to here, so just off to the edge of the fabric. Then here we just closed off that seam. Okay, so when we open it up, this is what it looks like. We've got the hole for the muzzle. Okay, so let's do the muzzle next. So here is our little muzzle piece, and what we want to do is we have our little notches here. This is our L marking, and we're going to fold it in half, and we're going to line up those L markings, and then we are going to just sew from here down to here on both sides. when we sew this part, it's gonna leave a little bit opening at the top, and that's okay. We're gonna still sew that closed in a minute at a different angle, but for now, we are just going to sew here and here. Okay, so here we go. So let's cut off our threads. And here is our muzzle so far. Oh, that's a marking, don't scratch that off. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna pull this open. So here are our markings for this. Can you see that? There is one right there, and then one on the other side too. Then we have the exact same thing on the opposite side right here and right here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our little markings, our little dots, and we're gonna pull it. We're gonna open it up all of the way so that it's flat. See how it's flat? And then open up your seam so you don't have anything bulky. But that's what we're gonna close now, is our little hole that we left open earlier. So put a little pin in there so that it stays where it's supposed to. Oops, I slid it over a little bit. Get your dots lined up so the dots are right on the outside is where they're supposed to be. Okay. So we're ready to sew. We're gonna sew from this dot across and over to this dot. We're gonna do the same thing on this side. So let's pull it apart, pinch that seam open, add a little pin so it stays. And we're ready to sew. We'll sew from this dot across over to this dot. Now, something to think about if you want to is you can definitely go past these dots and add a little bit of a curve to your stitch right here, and that's going to make it a little bit of a softer curve and a little bit of a rounder muzzle. Do giraffes even have muzzles? I don't know what they're called. A nose something. Anyway, so it's going to be a little bit of a softer rounded part right there if you curve your seam a little bit. So our little side seams are closed, and this is the inside. So if we are to turn it around, here's our nose. There we go. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to pin this little nose into the face. Okay, so here's our face. We put that to the side for a minute, and we have our little nose done. On the pattern right here, we have a marking, it's M, and we have it on the same opposite side right here. I really recommend marking these, whether you clip it into your fabric or add a little notch to the outside or something. Make sure you mark these because it'll help you center the nose so that it's straight, the muzzle. So, and then here's the seam. We're gonna use the bottom seam as our guide for the other one. So on here, we clipped out the L marking, which is the top and the bottom, but then we didn't have to clip the side because that's just, we're gonna line it up with the seam. So something to keep in mind with this, it's not really directional unless you feel like your fabric is directional, and minky is directional. So look at your direction that your fabric is going so that the nap is going down. I sewed one of these and the nap was going up, so it kind of combs funny, but I mean, it's not a big deal. You can hardly tell, but I noticed afterwards and it bugged me. So make sure that it's going down. So this is going to be the top of our nose and this is going to be the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're just going to ease it right into this hole. The thing that I find to keep it straight, the easiest to straight is we got to keep our right sides together all the way around. So it actually goes this direction when you start pinning. So line up each of our markings and pin all the way around. So when we are easing something in like this, something to think about is when we are lining it up, we might have to ease it in a little bit, which means you have to work your fabric a little bit so that it will stay in, or so you line it all up evenly, I guess. So something to think about is that we use the outside cutting line as a guide, but what we're actually trying to line up is the seam allowance line right here on the inside where the 1/4 of an inch is lining up. So even if the outside cutting line isn't lining up as nicely as we would like, what we're really trying to accomplish is to line up that outside line. So we got to make sure there are no bunches in there, and we're pinning that spot, because really that is the line that when I sew or create my patterns, those ones have the exact same measurement. The outside cutting line doesn't necessarily have that same length to it, but for each of them. So see how here it looks like there's more fabric here than it is here. See how it's tight? What we want to do, and something that you can do, is clip the outside a little bit to give a little more ease into this fabric, which will help us to better line up the stitch line. So we're gonna keep going around. Use as many pins as you feel like you need to get this in the way that it's supposed to sit. We want it to sit so that there are no little bunches in our fabric. So don't hesitate to use as many pins as you feel like you need to get that done. So I'm going to keep going around and pinning this, and then we can sew it. Okay, so here we go. This is all pinned into place. You can see I used a lot of pins. It just keeps it all together. It's easier, especially with Minky, to just use a lot of pins, but we're gonna try to keep all of our wrinkles down. So when we do our sewing, we want the nose to be on the inside and the face to be down on the plate. Just remember as you're sewing that you can pivot your face around. Since it is a circle, just keep bringing it around so that you're never really running out or feel like it's tugging. If it feels like it's tugging, make sure that you bring the fabric that's already gone around the back side back forward again, so that it's always easy to sew. Okay, so here it is, all stitched together. So let's check our seams. Kind of hard to see, Minky kind of rolls up on itself. But I don't see any weird bunching. It's a little weird right there, but I think that it's probably okay. That's one thing I really like about Minky and sewing with Minky, is it's a little trickier actually sewing it in the machine, but it hides quite a bit of mistakes. So there's our little eyes, and here is the nose all ready to go. Look, I still sewed the nose in upside down, so don't do that, okay? Make sure you're I can't believe I did that. Make sure that your nap is going the right direction. Okay. Even after I told you guys to not do that, I still did it. See, it's not a huge deal. It still looks fine. It's just that the nap would probably look better if when you combed down naturally, like with the rest of the fabric, it went and looked nice, but you have to comb up for it to go up now. Oh goodness, there's always something, right? Okay, so let's move on to the next part.